Last night I did a show, our Wednesday night special on national suicide and what's actually killing our kids. And I started the show with Christopher Rufo because we started with the non-literal suicide, the national suicide that really comes from critical race theory. Christopher is the contributing editor for the City Journal and the director of Center on Wealth and Poverty. He is the guy who is really responsible for rooting this out and letting people know what critical race theory is and how deeply embedded in the system. If you missed last night's show, we talked about this curriculum that is in public schools up in New York, and they identify the 8 white identities that you have, and it starts at white supremacist, and then I think one of them is a race traitor. And that's on the good side of the scale, by the way. If you're a race trader, if you're selling out the white race, it's crazy. I wanted to bring Christopher back. Let's talk about critical race theory because I am getting messages from people who want to know. I have to go into a critical race theory kind of thing in my office, and they'll fire me if I say anything. I saw Accenture, I think, let a 30-year partner go because he spoke up against this and said, we shouldn't be doing any of this. Tell me about how critical race theory is going to be affecting people, if it hasn't already, in their places of business and what they should do.
Yeah, I mean, if it isn't already in your workplace, and your workplace is like a large corporation, a publicly owned firm, it's coming. And it's going to come under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, which sound great, but sometimes are really aggressive propaganda and indoctrination campaigns.
Can you say first what the difference between equality, which our Constitution talks about, and equity, which is critical race theory? What is the difference? Because they sound the same, and people think, equity, equality, it's the same. It's not.
Yeah, equality is the idea that we're all created equal under God, and that the government, should protect individual rights regardless of race, creed, color, religion, etc. And essentially, it's the equal protection under the law. Equity is the critical race theorists basically say, hey, equality hasn't worked. We still have large racial disparities. There's still kind of systemic racism in society. So they've abandoned the idea of equality, treating people equally, and replaced it with equity, which is treating groups as units and then trying to equalize outcomes based on group identity. So it's a very kind of quick way to think about it is equality is something like the equality of opportunity, and equity is the equality of results, which we've seen over and over in the 20th century lead to human and social disaster.
Okay, so I'm in my office. Thank God this isn't happening at my company, but I'm in my office, and I get a note that says I have to attend this racial diversity and equity class, and I want nothing of it. And maybe there are people in my office, but no one will say anything. What do I do? And what happens if nobody does stand up against it?
Well, there's a couple things you can do. One is if you feel confident enough and you feel like you have the conviction to do so, you can stand up, you can speak out, you can send a letter to the HR department letting them know that these theories don't actually lead to better outcomes in the business literature. They put the firm at legal risk for lawsuits, and that they conflict with your own deeply held beliefs.
How do they open up the firm for lawsuits?
Well, I'm working on this, but I think there's a strong case to be made, and there's some kind of analogies in case law that if critical race theory, for example, traffics in racial stereotypes, they say white people can be reduced to the essence of whiteness, and it's analogous with oppression. That's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. If they compel speech, especially in public institutions, that's also a violation of the law. And then if it creates a toxic work environment, which in many cases it does, it's pitting people against each other. It's creating a kind of race-based harassment, which is a protected category. Again, these are all actual violations of the law. And I think big companies are maybe the quickest to potentially change tack, because their legal departments, if this starts becoming a cost center, if it starts becoming a legal risk, if they start fearing lawsuits, they're going to probably disband a lot of these programs pretty quickly. So I think that's one, excellent way forward that we could hopefully see unfold in the next few years.
You have giant companies. You're read up on the Great Reset, Chris?
Yeah.
I mean, you see these what are called ESGs, these standards in these big companies, and that's the first red flag. If your company has an ESG, environmental, social justice, and governmental standards, you're already in trouble.
Yeah, and I think people are going to have to make a big decision. If your beliefs, your politics, your faith is important, and you work at a company that is actively kind of mobilizing against it, you have a tough ethical and moral choice to make. Do you stay and fight, or do you find employment with a company that lets you express yourself more authentically? And I've talked to a lot of people in the last 6 months where they say, I have these obligations, I have a family, I have a career, I have a reputation, but this is just eating away at me. This political indoctrination, trying to shame people, trying to create collective guilt based on race or faith or identity. And I tell them, you really have two options. You're going to have to sit and take it, or you're going to have some courage and stand up for those convictions. And in some cases, people are actually starting to fight back. And in, some cases, even fewer, unfortunately, they're actually having success at shutting down these programs.
You did a great story in the City Journal on anti-racism comes to the heartland. And you talk about Springfield, Missouri, how the teachers are being forced to locate themselves on the oppression matrix, which is what?
The oppression matrix is a kind of graph or grid that was designed by some social justice academics that basically said, these are the checklists that makes you an oppressor. These are the checklists that makes you an oppressed person. So white, male, heterosexual, English-speaking Christians were the kind of dominant oppressors, and then, the other side. And it was a middle school in Springfield, Missouri, a place that is not a kind of progressive stronghold. It's not LA or New York. And they were forcing teachers to essentially locate themselves on this oppression matrix and telling white male teachers, you are an oppressor, telling female or people of color that were teaching in the system, you are an oppressed, taking in none of the actual reality of the situation, no one's individual stories, and categorizing them in this way. And teachers were absolutely outraged. They leaked me the documents, and hopefully the school district will think twice before doing it again.
It also, they handed out flyers or some, training materials, and the handout originally listed MAGA as, quote, a form of covert white supremacy. Now, they took that off because people found out about it, and so they went back into the hiding and they scampered under the refrigerator like cockroaches do. But MAGA, this should show you where we're headed when they say, hey, we got to find extremists. The stuff that is being passed out to our teachers in schools is really revealing on who they think those dangerous extremists are, and they're the people in the red states.
Yeah, absolutely, that's right. And I think we've seen an evolution of language. For the last 4 years under the Trump administration, there was this drumbeat from the media constantly saying, making the association that white conservative Christians are by definition white supremacists. And there was an attempt to tie those two phrases together. And then on January 6th, and I know you condemned it, I condemned it, the violence at the Capitol, they were gleeful. You could those 72 after, they said, this is our big opportunity. We can now move from white supremacists to white supremacist domestic terrorists. And it's really a kind of maybe spontaneously coordinated, but clearly a coordinated language campaign to basically create the connotation between conservative and Republican voters and white supremacists and domestic terrorists. And these phrases are dangerous. I mean, it's a truly, the worst thing that can be. and they're trying to basically annex all conservative voters into that kind of linguistic umbrella, which then they could use to silence, to deplatform, to outlaw, and to marginalize what I think is, if not a majority, a strong plurality of the country.
Christopher Rufo, thank you so much. We'll talk again. Thank you for all of your hard work. You can follow him on Twitter at RealChrisRufo, RUFO, or his website is ChristopherRufo.com. Thanks, Chris. We'll talk again.
Thank you.